I'm on the. I promised you to make some work of like some further feedback on the emails and stuff like that. And what I've done is I've taken your first emails, the follow up from Facebook, blah blah blah, and I've just like taken that out, put it in a Drive document, which I'll share with you, and then I've kind of like added it through it and changed things because I think that's the easiest way to show you like really what I have in mind. It's easier to give feedback this way and to just show what I mean rather than to just be pointing how things should be in your email. So there's a couple of different things that I want to, well, of course you should read through the email, but a couple of things that I would like to point out and that I would want to ask you if you can see if you can kind of like rework that in your other emails also. So that will probably be the easiest way. The very first thing I'll start with is this first piece, which is really about setting expectations for me more than anything else, and that's similar to what we actually do on the success page, and it's similar like in all these points that we constantly need to sell people on taking the next step, right? So if people click on the email, the first job we need to do is, sell them on the fact that they need to read the email. And then, as they're at the end of the email, we need to sell them on the fact that they're going to read or like open at least the next email tomorrow, etc., etc. So it's constantly like this kind of like, slippery slide idea where it constantly needs to go down, and there needs to be constantly this kind of momentum of like the next step, the next step, the next step. And people don't need to see very far ahead, but they need to know kind of where things are going. So the first thing I would like to do and change a little bit compared to how we do it now is communicate clearly to them. This is actually what you're going to get over the next couple of days. This is kind of the stuff that we're working on. So I've tried to do that basically this way. In the next few days, you'll learn how I had a mental breakdown and cried in my mommy's arms because life at 32 years old was one big crying mess, right? So that's on the one hand promise kind of like this drama, and also it promises this kind of like, a story very relatable to what they're in. I'll tell you how out of all the things yoga completely changed my life around, and how I can help you do the same thing, right? So we relate it in a very obvious kind of way, related back to them. And today I'll tell you how I ended up living the dream life in Bali by total accident. So here actually I'm kind of like selling them on why they should read the email. So I think one thing that we should look at in like all this email communication is to see how we can be clear about what they're gonna get out of it from like a high level, right? Why they should care to open up these emails. And the main promise we can make them is that we're gonna help them make this life change. Basically, that's why they should be reading the emails, because they care about that life change. So that's the first thing, and that's, this is part of that, but more in general kind of terms about like constantly setting expectations and telling like in a very kind of like obvious way, this is the stuff that's coming up, and this is why you should be excited about it, and this is why it will help you. Then the next thing is like how to format the email, and especially how to use kind of like subheaders or something like that. So I've made it like really obvious in this email, of like, and I've just made them a little bit bigger also, so it's even easier kind of like to spot how you can use headlines. And the best way to use headlines is based on the idea, it's called dual readership path. So that means that there's always people that are like readers basically, right? And there's people that are scanners, and they need to basically be sold on why they should be reading, right? So an easy way to lose everyone is by making the email look like it's gonna be a headache to read. It's gonna be a lot of text and all of that. So the easiest way to do that is to make our headlines kind of tell the basic story, and if you want to know more about the story, you need to read the whole text. So if we go through these headlines, every night I came home to an overpriced, nearly empty basement apartment. I can remember I was totally and completely fed up with my life, and sometimes I'd go an entire evening without speaking to another living being. I needed to change, but things would get nasty first. Blah, blah, blah. So if people read just the headlines, they pretty much get the whole story. actually throughout this whole email, I've set up the headlines in such a way that if you read the headlines, you kind of get the story. And also each of the headlines kind of is this little salesman in a way selling why you should read the next piece of text, right? So what I want to do is like put the juiciest stuff kind of in these headlines, so it kind of sells them on reading. So that's why I pulled up this one to the front, for instance. Totally, completely fed up with my life, and it's like easy for people to follow along. So that's kind of how we can use headlines to make the whole story flow smoother, kind of. So that's basically the second idea. If you read through this whole email, you'll see that I've also kind of like reformatted things a little bit, and I'm trying to make this into these kind of like really digestible little pieces, right? So people can read through it and be like, oh, okay, this is doable, right? Okay, I can read this. I can, that doesn't feel like a massive commitment. So it's like a headline and a few texts, and a headline and a few texts, and that's kind of like how I'm trying to do it. Another thing that I did, and this is actually an important one, is that we have this story. If you just read through the whole story, you can feel sometimes that like somewhere in the story it kind of like loses speed, kind of, right? So if you think of this slippery slope, it's just not going steep enough, basically. So there's not enough like progress in the story. And one of the things here is basically we have this story of like life sucks. You go to mom says you should try yoga, and then you tell the change of how you got into yoga. And actually I think this whole idea of like how you got into yoga, we can actually move out, because that's really your personal story, but something that'll be hard for them to relate to in a sense, because for everyone that's a little bit different, right? So this is not something that really pushes the story forward. If the story is, I'll tell you how I ended up living the dream life in Bali by total accident. So the story of living a dream life is like, it was shit and then it got great. So what I would suggest is that we remove this whole piece of like yoga as kind of the change, but rather we make the change the fact that you became a teacher, the fact that you went to Bali and stuff like that. So basically I've made like this shortcut where we go from like, mom said like, we need something else. And one of the first classes I ended up with was a workshop on how to use yoga as a tool to bring more joy and happiness into your life. How suitable, right? So that way we kind of like shortcut through that, and we go straight there. So this has the added benefit of also making it a little bit shorter. And another thing that I've done throughout the email, I've just left one here so you can see it, is that sometimes there's like, sometimes there's big chunks that you can move out because they kind of slow things down, but sometimes there's also small pieces that slow things down. So for instance, I'd never met the teacher before, but he seemed like a really nice guy, and he was from LA, but the fact that he's from LA doesn't really move the story forward. So those kind of small pieces, especially those kind of things that you would put between whatever you call those things, and stuff like that, kind of breaks the flow of the reader often, right? And another thing that really breaks the flow of the reader, and I do that sometimes myself also, and I noticed you did that once or twice, is these contradictions, kind of where you say like, it was like this way, but it was like also like that, but it was also, and then it's hard to follow for people. So we want like every sentence to have like one idea, and that's how we move through. So the idea of this sentence is like to introduce the fact that there's a teacher, right? So I'd never met a teacher before, but he seemed like a nice guy. So basically we set up this teacher, and the fact it's from LA doesn't really help. So this actually can go out. If you read this, I would recommend you put that out, and I also would recommend that this whole piece can go out. But here's the life-changing part. That's kind of like the last thing, right? You're going to be a yoga teacher someday, right? And then what I've done here is make a little bit more of like a cut, really, to to what's coming next. So what you added here, like these small bullet points of like the journey that follows is a story that sometimes even I can't really believe. That's great because it really sets the stage for what's coming, right? So it creates this kind of feel of like, okay, this is what we're going to talk about in the future. So that's great. And what you did here in the initial version is kind of, I think you felt kind of bad about the fact that you're like shortcutting them, or like, you know, that you're cutting off the story there. So you felt kind of like sorry for that. And also sometimes you would mention, you know, but I won't talk about that because it will get really long. So you feel kind of sorry that the story is long, which is also not something you should feel sorry for, probably. So what I've done rather is just make this kind of the punchline, and then just put like a little break so people can see that it kind of stops there. And then we just make this real like pause, right? We just like full stop and like, okay, like why does it stop here? And tomorrow I'll send you another email to be continued tomorrow, just so it's like super duper clear for people. Okay, I need to read tomorrow, and then the answer will come. Speak soon, Amanda. Check PS, and what I do in PS is basically just quickly edit this and further selling them on like what's coming up next and why they should care, right? So there's 3 things I would like to share with you. Why I think the yoga lifestyle might be a good fit for you. Of course, it's a good fit for them, right? Especially if they can relate to your story. I'll help you with some ideas and tips on how to actually make that transition happen, and I'll introduce you to the exact people that I know can make this lifestyle change a possibility for you. So we're very much selling them on the idea here that actually this lifestyle change is going to happen. And remember that big change to life can sometimes go incredibly fast. In a few months from now, everything could be different. More on that tomorrow. Speak soon. So that way we're setting them up more for like, okay, this whole roller coaster is like, you know, on the, at this like top point where it's like gonna go down and it's gonna be exciting. So that's a couple of things that I think you could work with in all the emails that we write, right? So there's like this idea of using like PS and pre-PS and those kind of areas to better set expectations. There's like how you use the headlines to make this dual readership path so people can follow along just on the headlines. It looks way more readable, like less intimidating basically. It looks like something doable, something fun, and always kind of like really looking how can we pull the drama and the exciting stuff forward and just skip all the kind of like water that just like makes it fluffy, and get rid of that, and that will really help us improve the story. So let me know if you have further questions on this, and I hope that this kind of example can help you better understand basically what I'm saying, and that you can work through all these emails. And it probably doesn't even really take all that long. It took me like, I don't know, 20 minutes probably to go through this. Yeah, so that can really make this whole email flow a lot more exciting for people. So that's it, really.